Okay, so we're rounding the corner on our little section on Introduction to Logic. After this, you either will be going to categorical logic, with the Aristotle form of logic, propositional logic, which is used a lot of times in computer science, predicate logic. There's all kinds of different routes that you can go from here. But this is the end of us is really describing what it is that we're actually doing when we do logic. And the final thing we're going to talk about here is what is a good argument? What is a good logical argument? We're going to use this term validity. And a valid argument is one where, one of the things we're going to figure out, what exactly is a valid argument? What exactly are we looking for when we're trying to set up things the right way? So here is an example of a valid argument. And hopefully that'll clear up exactly, kind of what we're looking at. Now, this comes from Philosophy of Free Will. Premise 1, either we have free will or we are just robots. Premise 2, we're not just robots. Conclusion, therefore, we must have free will. Now, notice the way that's set up, right? It's like either one or the other. You have to have one or the other, but you don't have one of them, so you must have the other. And it seems like there's just no way that you can have those first two things be true and the conclusion be false. And you could put anything you want in those two spots, and it seems like you would set up a valid argument. So I could say, either it's Fred or it's Roger. It ain't Fred, therefore it's got to be Roger, right? So that would be the same exact format of a logical argument. So no matter what we substitute in, so long as the premises are true, it seems like the conclusion is true. That's part of what it is to be valid, right? Our first premise says at least one of these two things are true. Our second premise says, hey, one of those things I actually know is false. The third premise is, well, at least one of those two things are true, and one of them I know is false. It must be the other one that's true. Seems like it's got to be true that way. And this, in the book that we've been going through, and Nicholas Smith calls necessary truth preserving, NTP for short, right? NTP is when it's impossible for the premises to be true, but the conclusion to be false. And that seems like that's what we want for validity, right? That's what the whole purpose of us setting things up in a logical manner. However, that's not everything, Smith says, right? So, for example, I could have an NTP, a necessary truth-preserving argument that is necessary truth-preserving, but not for the sake of, not because of the logical setup. So, for example, I say humans ingest salt, therefore humans ingest chloride. Now, since salt just is chloride, there's no way for the premise to be true and the conclusion to be false. And yet, it's not like we saw before where you could just substitute whatever you wanted to and for the top one and then get the bottom one. So I could, say H ingests S, therefore H ingests C, right? H ingests salt, therefore H ingests chloride. But S could stand for soup. So S could stand for what's something that doesn't have, saffron, right? Humans ingest saffron, therefore humans must ingest chloride. It seems like those two things could be, the premise could be true, but the conclusion could be false. And the whole reason why it was necessary truth preserving had something more to do with the chemical makeup of what salt is than it did for the format of the logical argument. So when we say something is valid, the form is going to have to be important. And so here's what Smith says is valid, and I like this. An argument is valid if and only if the form of the argument guarantees that it's necessary truth preserving. And that whole if and only if we haven't really talked about yet. That means if the argument is valid, then it must be the case that the form guarantees the necessary truth preserving. And if the form of the argument guarantees that it's necessary truth preserving, then it must also be a valid argument, right? You can't have one without the other, something like that. So that is what validity is. an argument is valid if and only if its form guarantees that it's necessary truth preserving. Is that all a logician does? Well, take the following example from a religious debate. Jesus was a pacifist. Pacifists are against all war, therefore Jesus was against all war. Now, it sure seems like if the top two premises were true, then the conclusion must be false. And it's based on the form, right? So this is a valid argument. That obviously we haven't really gotten too far in. How can you know for sure? But this is a valid argument. But premise one is at least questionable, right? Remember what I said was if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true as well. Religious scholars will debate the truth of number one, right? Was Jesus a total pacifist? He definitely said, blessed are the peacemakers. He also never told the centurion, you need to go and give up your war fighting. I don't know. That is something for religious scholars to debate, but it's not something for the logician to worry about. Again, the logician is worried about validity of the argument. So whether the premises are true or not, that isn't the logician's interest, right? So the logician is worried about it being valid. The other scholars are worried about whether the premises are true or not. And if you have true premises and you have a valid form, then you have, we say, a sound argument, right? The premises are true, the form is valid, therefore the conclusion has to be true. The logician then isn't really interested in, as a logician, isn't interested in the soundness of the argument. The logician is solely interested in the validity of the argument because he's not really worried as much about the truth of the argument. Of course, as a person, the logician would obviously be interested in the soundness of an argument. And really, that's the whole point of really doing logic in the first place, oftentimes, I should say. Why are we studying this logic unless we were trying to understand the truth about the world? Or you wanted to do computer science or something like that. So the logician's interest is in validity. Validity is whether the form of the argument preserves truth necessarily. In other words, whether the form of the argument makes it such that the premises being true means the conclusion must be true, but he's not so much worried about are the premises actually true.